Thank you everyone for joining the Wild and Precious Life series. I'm excited for tonight and to introduce our first reader, don't know why I'm saying that, but Josh Davis is our first reader of the evening. Josh, for your introduction, I thought actually that I would read the poem from the Riley Review that you and Allison Blevins wrote that won the Lux Miller Poetry Prize. So I am going to read that poem for everyone.
Thank you. That's nicer than I deserve. That's really nice.
Now hold up, everybody get the fall issue. The Fever's Children, and there's an epigraph from the Sylvia Townsend Warner novel, Summer Will Show. The night after my father's slid into its oven, not at all like bread, with none of its promise, I wanted to make someone pregnant. I wanted to trammel my father's soul, if he had one, if anyone does, before it could escape. We're tightening locks, anointing doorways against plague. I remember the nurse with her butterfly needle. She struck me 3 times. Come on, little thingy, please work. Once I stood in a ring of 7-year-olds. When I said my dad has AIDS, they scattered like starlings. I long to write a line that rises like a mangrove, out of water, into air unmoving, surrounded by black islands of mosquitoes. As dull light carves letters inside gaps between leaf and leaf shadow, I long to write the line that slides clean, as the bloody knife you left in the sink, Grandma, clean or even, sharp as the tip of a Spanish bayonet. Thanks for being here. The screen is yours, Josh.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Dustin, for having me. And thank you, Jessica and Danielle and all you beautiful, gorgeous people for sitting on Zoom at 7:41 in the evening. I really appreciate that. I'm going to read a small clutch of poems from my chapbook, which is called Reversal Spells in Blue and Black, and it came out from Seven Kitchens Press. And I regret to say that there are no copies for sale because it sold out. But I hope that you will support Seven Kitchens in some way, in any case, because Ron, who runs Seven Kitchens, is really amazing. He's a true literary steward. So I'm going to start with a poem called Isle Full of Noises. And this poem does kind of a weird thing where it takes some biographical elements and also some stuff that I stole from The Tempest and maybe some images that I stole from the film Birth. Do you remember that film with Nicole Kidman? She's absolutely stunning in that movie, but it's a completely underrated performance. Anyway, so I kind of swirled all these things around and ended up with this poem, Isle Full of Noises. At bedtime, the boy tugs his tired blue comforter, smoothing its waves and the flounce of its foam. A storm turns its aperture onto his room. Sailboats faint, breezy drapes swill their trim. Sometimes his father leans in the doorway, swaying, whistling, fierce in that dark. Sometimes his father sits close, puts his mouth near the boy's ear, recites, "Be not afraid." Next, I thought I'd read a poem that it took me a really long time to finish. And by a long time, I mean more than a decade. And I have to say that it sort of began as a poem that I thought would be relatively straightforward, but as some poems are, it skittered and veered and it slept for a long time and it refused to behave. And then I found myself approaching it again out of the anger and the outrage and the complete disbelief that I felt, that I think so many of us felt at the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which seemed completely inevitable, right? And also stunning in its ability to break all our hearts, I think. So this is called A Tale, and it comes with an epigraph, says, "After Louise Bogan." And that's the Bogan poem, also called A Tale. And just for reference, I'll say a couple lines of that so that we can see how I'm riffing. That poem starts, "This youth too long has heard the break of waters in a land of change." So I think that's enough of the bogan in your ear to know what I'm up to here. A tale. The golden kings came for her money. She told them, I have none. She'd long spent her coins on the road that carved west of the sea. Somewhere she'd traded the cloak the north wind wrapped around her. So the kings tracked her trek through the foothills and over the cliffs. Still she tore down the king's gilded palaces, melted their idols. She scratched out their laws. She uncaged their 7 sunbirds. Then she fled to the south, to the one whose 9 women ruled with her. Where the bakers and seamstresses thrived, there she fashioned a name. When the golden kings came for her money, she said, but it's mine. As the ocean engulfed them, she opened her arms to hot sky. I think I'm gonna change tacks a little bit and read a prose poem. And this one comes out of like a strange kind of happenstance that although my father died when I was 25 and my mother died, I think when I was 32, it happened to be the case that I wasn't present for either of their deaths and didn't see either of their bodies. And it seems to me that if your life gifts you a piece of weirdness like that, you really have no choice but to deal with it in poetry. Like that's one of the things poetry is for. That's part of its business, it seems to me. So this is called Because I Never Saw the Body. I tell myself you're out there, escaped. You headed farther south in secret. Orange light rolled in window squares across your thighs. The bus smelled like cherry cough syrup. When you got to Key West, you threw your tortured shoes into the ocean and watched them ride the surf. Now you sit with a man 20 years your junior. His hair is darker than my mother's. His voice is full of birds. He remembers how you like 3 paper parasols in your drink and 1 cherry skewered by a pink plastic saber. When someone asks whether you ever wanted kids, you say no. In case you're missing me, in case you read this, I have a son. Have you heard? I'll warn you. Stay tanned and ageless and sparkling on your island. Console yourself with melted wax sunsets, with coconut shrimp, with the glittering chatter of your fellow exiles. Stay away. If I see you again, I'll kill you myself. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all.
Thanks, Josh. And you have time if you want to read a couple more. You're good. Thank you. And next up is Danielle Deulen. And Danielle, for your interview, there was a student, looks like you did an interview with the Collegian, the school newspaper back in March 2020, and the student wrote an article about you and wove in some quotes from you. And I really liked one part of that. And I think this is actually the first time I've ever read a student's article. So I think that's also pretty cool because I'm a nerd. I love first times. So I'm excited about this. So I'm going to take you back to 2020. Deulen explained that during revising, when she feels stuck, she reads other people's books in the hopes of finding a good model for what she's trying to accomplish. She said, I'll know what I'm doing wrong generally. Usually it's either I become too vague or I become too specific. And what I do in that case to correct myself is I'll pick up an author that does the opposite of what I've been doing. So if I feel like I'm dwelling in minutiae imagery and I'm not moving forward at all, I'll read someone who has a really beautifully structured plot. I love that advice. And thank you for being here tonight. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here so late in the evening. I'm going to read first from my first book, Lovely Asunder. I'm supposed to show you guys. It was published back in 2011. So feels like a different me in some ways that wrote this. There are a lot of poems in here that deal with well, family. I think a lot about sisterhood. And also, there are several poems in here that are poems to women from Western literature who I thought got a bad rap, and I'm giving them a different perspective. But so for this very first poem, I'm gonna read For My Sister in the River. And there's an epigraph here from John 1:23. I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness. I was trying to be cruel when I threw the rhododendrons in her hair. It was spring and the petals were sticky, bruised, and crimson against her dark hair. But instead of crying, she laughed, spun herself into this photograph of a girl dancing in circles so fast her body blurs, her head a deep magenta and earth. My sister is small and stronger than she looks. In a decade, she'll arrive late at the door, her lip split, eyes swollen shut. Her baby girl blushed with tears wound around her like a delicate vine. She'll walk into the kitchen, sit down on linoleum, say, I'll never go back. I want to believe I hear her voice filling with her voice from the river we swam as girls, where we'd take turns being John the Baptist, drenching each other in the muddy tide. Underwater, I could feel my sister's skinny arms straining to pull me through currents, lift me through the dark surface, press her fingers to my forehead, say, you're forgiven, you're healed. We were too powerless to be prophets. I don't mean halos appeared above us in the river, or the kitchen was lit by anything other than streetlight lost from the roads outside. Just that we knew, without psalm or song to guide us, we had to save each other. The second poem here is Apologia, which is a defense of one's actions. I hope it's self-explanatory. When I wrote it way back, I think there was a measure up against abortion in South Dakota, and now here we are all this time later. So I did have that. I was thinking of Roe v. Wade when I wrote this. Apologia. They were on a train in a tunnel between Brooklyn and Manhattan when he said he felt quiet. She asked what quiet felt like, and he said, small. She knew more about him then, thought of how small he looked the night she told him she was sorry about their baby. The attic's slant made everything smaller as she lay with her ear to his stomach to listen to him breathe. Music from a room downstairs rose through the floor, and when she told him, he went silent. They listened to a solo, the string steel guitar holding and bending each long note until it broke into the next. When she realized he wouldn't speak, she stood, left the house, and outside, everything was huge. The night, the trees, the street became wider, longer as it led to the park. She found two young men beneath lamplight and oaks, unfolding an American flag they said they stole from a town near Mount Rushmore. It was small at first, but unfolded and unfolded until it veiled the entire field. She thought of mundane expectation, how a flag that size raised at the center of a town might be seen for miles in a South Dakota landscape, how the people waking early, looking out at the black hills in half light must have had a dim sense of something missing as they sipped coffee, chewed, swallowed their breakfast, stared out at the empty sky, the way we might in the first weeks of winter, not quite seeing the bare limbs of trees, not yet knowing why this sense of loss, of displacement. And then her body felt too small to hold her, so she left it, drifted up through the pale lamp light, the boughs of dark oaks, watched one young man sprinting along the stripes, the other shouting the Pledge of Allegiance, and her body curled up over one giant star, like something unborn inside it. Let's see. I thought, oh, that's right. Okay. I'm going to read one of my women in mythos poems. It's short. Y'all remember the myth of Pandora's box? The title goes into the first line of the poem. When Pandora opened her box, she found an empty box. The moon, just a sharp hook of light above her, lacuna in the flesh of the sky. Sometimes the idea of the thing is more dangerous than the thing itself. And after, of course, the gods had someone to blame. Okay. I'm switching books. We're on to my second book here. Our emotions get carried away beyond us. The first poem I'm going to read here is called American Curse. I wrote it right around the time that Sandy Hook happened. It happened and I was trying not to think about it, as I sometimes tend to do. And somehow I went on some crazy goose chase looking for, I had heard, people kept posting this thing like, as the ancient Chinese proverb says, like, or the, curse, like, may you live in interesting times. Is it a curse or this? And I started looking up, researching that, and that's not a thing. It's attributed to some sort of ancient Chinese proverb. It is actually, you can follow it back to an American saying. So I thought that was very strange, that there was this idea that like curses couldn't be American. So I wrote this. It's called American Curse. May dark soldiers lead you through the mountains. May you find the criminal weeping in his hands. May the scent of whiskey rise from your horses. May you build your mansion in the sands. May the beauty of your children be too great for kindness. May the forest reappear when you close your eyes. May your dogs grow wild as your heart grows tame. May your bullet always meet with its aim. I'm going to read a quick unrequited love poem that takes place in Salt Lake City. So I have to explain something to you. It's called Winter Inversion. And in the Winter Inversion, basically the cold acts as a cap in Salt Lake City, which is ringed by mountains. So the whole valley just fills up with like smoke and toxic poisons. And another weird thing happens, which is that all of the underground creatures think that they understand that because it's cool. So they understand it as like cool and moist. And so all like snails in just droves like come up out of the ground all over. So you can't really walk around. A, you'd be like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes just by walking, and B, you're going to go all over their shells. And this is a love poem that takes place then and there. Winter Inversion, Salt Lake City. All winter, the air has been at record-breaking levels of toxicity. Announcers warn not to go out into the red days. Seagulls displaced from coastal cities cry poison over the desert plains. We pretend not to live where we do, that we don't turn away from each other with regret. I try to avoid breathing in your scent. Long ago, glaciers carved this valley, then melted away into sand. The change was torture, and now the stunned hills shudder, go white. You see, it's not a simple mimesis, memory for landscape. It's the silence, the smog, my skin blazing for you like a lamp at the end of a wharf where an ocean never was, or was so long past it no longer matters. I can't stand it anymore. At night, when I walk out, I feel the crush of shells beneath my feet, snails fooled by the cool, wet air. So at first I think I've arrived at a shore. Then I see how I've murdered what would have delighted me, how they must have shone in the dark, reaching out their antennae before them, blind and gleaming. I find no pearls within their ruined flesh. I know that you will never touch me. And for my last, it's from my newest book, which hasn't been published yet. It's coming out next fall with Bow Editions. I'm so excited. I'm super excited. I'm reading the last poem from that manuscript. The last whole section sort of deals with my grief surrounding a friend of mine who committed suicide about 4 years ago. And one of the things that I'm looking at in it is our sort of bonds with suicidal ideation, and him doing that and me not. So yeah, this is called Call. It lies dormant in you, some kind of happiness, even through the morning rain, the mundane turn out of the drive onto the road toward work, the keening daffodils rising green and gold from the mud. Even when the sidewalk's gray leads into your chest, a solid, immovable light is waiting. All those years I believed joy impossible. All those years I swerved down dim-lit highways, the blur of headlights swirling around me, or wandered weeping to the edge of a precipice, or walked into a body of water, daring myself to breathe in. I'm speaking plainly now, because I don't want to invite confusion or to remain alone in this bright field. Step away from the edge and turn toward me. I see you. I know that ache in your chest means that you want to live. Thank you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much. And very quickly, I know I did put it in the chat, but I want to go back and correct myself. When I was reading The Feverish Children, my mouth could not get the word body out. The first line is, the night after my father's body slid into its oven. For some reason, my brain was not cooperating and didn't want to say the word body. So I just wanted to correct myself on that. And then before I introduce our final reader of the evening, I'm going to give a plug. Limp Wrist is an online poetry journal that I run, and it is currently open for submissions through January. So if you have poems looking for a home, please save that link and read more about Limp Wrist. Our final reader of the evening is Jessica Walsh. And Jessica, I'm not taking you back too far for your intro. You did a mini interview back in March, and the question that you were asked was, how did you first engage with poetry? And I really liked what you had to say, and I feel like the ending, like part of this last line, is a poem itself. So I'm just going to read it for everybody. My grandmother used to recite poems to me. She was a hard woman to get to know, very guarded and even cold at times. But I have a memory of her pushing me in a swing and joyfully reciting Robert Louis Stevenson. Later, she would send me books like the collected poetry of Langston Hughes. And in the upper corner of the page, she would pencil a faint check mark to indicate that poem was one she especially wanted to emphasize. I look at those books now, decades after her death, and I try to figure out what she wanted me to know, what she wanted to be able to say. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dustin and Josh and Danielle. I can always tell I'm at incredible reading when I start forgetting that I'm going to be up at all. I just kind of soak into audience mode and start thinking, and then it's like, oh, right, I have to, I'm going to, yeah, it's a fond memory of mine. And the little check marks in the book. Sometime I think if I ever wrote a prose kind of memoir type thing, I think it would be about going through those books and figuring out what she was using poetry to tell me. Yeah. So I am going to read mostly from my new book, Book of Gods and Grudges. Right here. And a couple new ones then. So let's see. I'm so swept up now in thinking about lines from Josh's and Danielle's that I'm just like, okay, wait, refocus. Okay. I suppose I think poetry as a genre kind of comes with a trigger warning. It just is going to go in all the hard places, but just in case, I'm reading some stuff tonight that cuts pretty deep. So the first one I want to read is called The Pain Scale. I grew up in a pretty rural part of northern Michigan, and like all particularly smaller towns and rural areas, it's gone through a really hard time with opiates and then heroin and everything else. So the pain scale. I knew for a decade just one way to die. The one that took my uncle, my cousin, all the kids from my high school who didn't leave town. I'd see them gaunt and purpled outside of the Wesco. They'd call me Jennifer or Julie and ask for a 5. I heard I was the last person one guy talked to, and I have never stopped knowing I killed him with an embarrassed 20 and a good luck man. When my ex died in a wreck, I said it every time. No, his bike. It was an accident on his bike. Like I could prove another way to go young. Like I could break a spell. All right, I'm gonna read one I haven't read out loud before. And the reason for that is it's a poem I wanted to make sure was in the hands of everybody who in whatever veiled format was referenced here. I do some protective things with things that are true, like maybe changing genders or locations or things like that. So, but I wanted to make sure that I did not read this one until I felt like that was out there for them. In collection. On a shelf in Grand Rapids, maybe there's a thick plastic bag of tooth and bone, a bag of ash. The remains of my grandfather, whose 6 children gathered quietly for what looked exactly like mourning. They stood around a low-budget urn my uncle had filled with kitty litter. He said it feels the same. He couldn't leave it empty, but money's tight. And do you know what they charge? Each said to the next, yeah, money's tight, maybe in a few months. And from that moment, no one spoke of him again. He'd left his trailer to the daughter he fucked the most, and she sold it for heroin, the biggest buy she'd ever made. When it was gone, she licked the inside of the bag until it opened at its seams. One of the most remarkable things about looking into some of these stories is how amazing my dad turned out, escaping so much. It's just, okay. What kind of mother? At a Chinese restaurant in Michigan, my sister and I are kicking each other under a long table while my dad and all the aunts and uncles talk serious. Their voices are low and boring. My dad says, still, mom should have done something. She had to have known about dad. Our house was so small. She couldn't not know. My youngest uncle changes the subject. He's the one who almost became a fireman, but got kicked out because of drugs, which my sister and I know are scary things. He talks about meeting an old firefighter whose arms were quilted with burns and grafts, whose worst memories were bodies just inside unlocked doors, the near survivors. Smoke, the old firefighter had said, sure, but sometimes panic. You never know what you'll do in a fire until you're in it. Once he heard a woman's dying screams as she ran away from his help to get her bathrobe. She was a lady, I guess, had to be decent. My dad and all the aunts and uncles are never at a table again, not all at once. And in her death, their mother is sainted like a lady in a beautiful robe, dusted lightly with ashes. Okay, the next one is gonna go far back for some of you. I can look here and go, there are people too young to get the reference, but the there's a reference in here to Rumsfeld, Donald Rumsfeld. And he had a frankly, a poetically convoluted speech one time about with weapons of mass destruction, about known unknowns and known knowns and unknown unknowns. And so there's a quick little reference to that in here. If you can divorce it from its context as this horrible speech in a horrible war, like it's as a piece of language, it's just fascinating. What sober means. Drunk is known unknowns, like Rumsfeld said, and I drank back then, so he was more and less, depending on the day's curve. I don't try anymore to know if I knew and didn't care, or didn't even know. Even now in my coffee years, brick walls when I pass still hold their breath, like I'll forever bring the shatter. And oh, that glass music of shards skittering down. But the membrane's impermeable, wormholes closed. I can never have what I want. Who I am in the morning is who I am at dusk. I'm never at the quarry in a Plymouth with a man on the verge of something that will change our luck. I'm never on the verge. We were talking about work before we got started, and I grew up with my parents telling me that burnout was a luxury, that it's something you only get to burn out if you have the luxury of doing so, because most people just have to, it doesn't matter if they hate their jobs and are dead in their souls, they still just have to get up and go to work. Like, so they would talk about burnout and say, burnout's a luxury. Just keep going. Must be nice. My parents said burnout is a luxury, that people like us, we don't get to burn out. And true, who chooses introspection over car payments or school clothes? When I told my mother of our coming baby, she cried joyful tears, but added, you don't get to find yourself once you have kids. And a band tightened around my lungs that has never yet loosened. So what can I name this era of thickening, of misery, when I wait until 9 to put on makeup after morning's inevitable cry? When I sit in my car outside work like stones are piled in my lap. I would call my old working parents and tell them how I heard enough to carry a Bible, download self-help podcasts, how I tried yoga last week and am thinking of sabbatical. But I hear them already between my jagged breaths, their exhausted half laughter. Do you really think you can fall apart? People like us, we don't. I'm going to try to read another one out loud that I've never read. I mean, I've read it out loud to myself, of course, as part of the process, but I haven't read it at a reading. And it's a little bit nonlinear, a little bit abstract. And I want to mention before reading it, and just I like at readings to talk about the poems a little bit, because it's a chance where like we're personally interacting and you don't just have the page, so I can tell you things about it. And in 2019, my father suffered a traumatic brain injury and had to have brain surgery and a long and difficult rehabilitation. He was in a rehab facility that had this incredible picture window overlooking a lake. And we would talk about how wonderful it was, how everybody who was trying to heal should have a beautiful view, like this was good for the spirit. When I tried to write about that, and even now I can feel it kind of coming up in my heart here, I couldn't do it directly about him. So I had to remove the subject a little bit and create kind of a substitute figure. And so there's a she in that place, but yeah. That's what the background was of me looking out that window a lot and thinking about a parent in that spot where you're not sure what's going to happen. This is called Better One, Better Two. The bird in the tree, the bird with a leaf of the tree, the bed of the lake, the bed with a view of the lake, the sun through the blinds, the blind spot of sun with no blinds, your hair in the brush, the chair where she once brushed your hair left unbrushed, your hair in the mouth of a bird off to nest, her nest with a view of the lake, her bed by the lake, her bed where she sits while you now brush her hair, the sun on her bed, the sun on the nest she can see from her bed, your hair in the nest where the bird used a strand of your hair, the bed of the nest like the bed of a lake where you swam, the lake dried to dust, the dust on the chair where she sat as you swam, her hair in your brush, your bed like the leaf of a tree gone to dust, the tree in the dust, the sun on the nest made of strands of your grief, the grief of the sun, the blind spot of grief with no blinds. Okay. All right. I'm gonna read 3 new ones. My crowning achievement for like this entire month will have been reading that without starting to cry. So, okay. So I have a poem out in the very first issue of the Magnificent Journal. Is Fox still here? Okay. Alice says, "Go fuck yourself," which is just a brilliant title. And the whole issue is like, I feel like it should just be picked up by like Simon and Schuster or something and be like the snapshot brilliant issue of amazing stuff, because it's just cool. I'm so happy to have this piece in it. So, all right. This one's just called Money. That night, I was looking for a man to say I was hot. and he was rude in a way that turned me on back then. Said he was moving to Paris to live above a cafe. I knew Paris only from TV and the Je t'aime Paris stickers my fourth grade teacher gave us after she came back from a trip she called a tour of Europe, where not one of us had been because it was well outside of Mason County, even beyond Muskegon with its rough failing mall. To Paris to live above a cafe, I repeated. But what about a job? I asked. How will you live? He snorted. If you ask questions like that, you should never go. Do me a favor, he said, and stay at your little school. I sank back into myself, all practical and fat, and still I would have slept with him if he'd wanted, but he didn't. So I drank all alone all night while staying in my budget. Later, I found out about him, about his dad, really, who was a money man at GM. He was rich, I'm saying. I kept forgetting, or maybe I just found out that people can be rich like that, move to Paris rich. Rich so he could live above a cafe and never even look for work. Just work on looking ever so slightly poor. When one day I made it to Paris on scholarship and loan money, I had 12 hours and $10. Not enough for a museum even. Just bread and a bus pass. But I could not believe my life, that I had come to Paris. Who was I to be in Paris? And so I sat on a bench, slowly eating an entire baguette, stunned with gratitude, in love with the furiously smoking man who glared at me, in love with the tiny child who squatted and peed in the gutter nearby, giggling at her own tiny stream. And by the end of my bread, I was content. And I was content still when I made my way to the station to find the train I'd spend the night on. All right. All right, two more. Okay. This is another newish one. I have read this one before, but I continue to be actually kind of a junkie for, that's a horrible, okay, never mind. We'll pretend I meant to say that, for the show Intervention. And I like how it pulls back. Like but there's this little gimmick where if things have been successful, like if the person has gone through rehab and is now sober, they always cut to some scene where there's sunlight and birds and, shoreline and everything's beautiful. And then they go back to the person and the person says like, my life is amazing. I'm so great. I'm so happy. It's been this long. And I'm always filled with hope for them. And that doesn't really, there's not a lot of moments where I think like the sun is just shining and birds are singing and everything is perfect and beautiful, is what I'm saying. On television, birds sing when you're sober, but no one tells you that being clean means a clear eye on your misery. You see that your main job is staying in your shit and never again doing the one thing you were so good at. Sure, you were hell-bent, but what fun it was to be fun. To not know a night until it came back next day when you tuned into your own half-remembered opera and saw yourself dancing, fearless, fishnets and all, body spilling and celebrated. You're told this is brave, your cup of coffee, but how shrunken you are, how girdled, like you live encased in layers of spandex. No one tells you, but one day you'll see that most bullshit wasn't the booze's fault, and no birds sing. All right, I got one more. I'm gonna finish with this one. Like most people, who are fortunate enough to make it to midlife, and that's not a given, I'm content. You start going through doctor's appointments where you always leave with something, like you found out some condition, you get some prescription, you never just get a like, awesome, we'll see you in a year. So at one point I was waiting for something and just started getting the fear. And I've made peace with it. So everything's cool, but it was the moment of fear. It's normal to feel your body has betrayed you. That's the title here. Listen, as far as betrayals go, I started it. Sucking down Kool-Aid to Coke, straight through to whiskey. The Iowa years alone are worth a failed kidney, a fat liver. Miracle is, I made it this far before my body ran out of cheeks to turn. Oh, body, I begged you to take blow after blow, and you did. Even when I hated you, choked you with booze, gave you up to strangers, threw punches with your hands, took punches with your nose. Even when I ate until I puked or ate because I planned to puke, when I didn't eat or ate your weight, even this morning, I chewed a cookie, then spat it into the disposal like I could mock you and your hungry blood. Body, if you choose today to begin your rough reckoning, if today you pour all my secrets into charts and scans, if today is your cry for mercy, I promise you what I feel is not betrayal, but sad relief, like a tired bully about to be felled. It's time, body, for you to tell on me. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And I absolutely loved hearing Danielle and Josh, and thank you, Dustin, for the invitation to be here.
Thanks so much. I'm going to put each person that read tonight has a website, so you can read more about them, find out about all their products. They offer consulting services. Check those out. If you're able, I shared the links. Buy a book. It's the best way to support writers. If that's not in your budget right now, save the link and purchase a book when you can. It's always the best way to support. I'm also just going to drop in the link one more time, that link tree. We do have a reading on December 7th. Readings are booked all the way through next year. So I hope that you will share that schedule on social media. Don't want any money, just want you to share on social media. It's the best way to support the Wild and Precious Life series. So thank you, Josh. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Danielle. The series only works if people say yes when I invite them, and then people show up. So thank you to everybody that is here tonight. And I wish everybody a fabulous evening, and hope to see you back on the 7th.
Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.
Bye.